When his kingdom comes, darkness is nigh. Or 3 stars burning bright come from beyond to expel the night. A good villain can make the entire story or ruin it. The Core and the Nowhere King, 2 of the most iconic cartoon villains from the past few years, are great examples of well-written villains that greatly enhance their shows, though they do it in different ways. So what is the difference between them, and who is the better villain? To answer this question, let us quickly get on the same page about what even makes a great villain. A well-written villain has a complex biography, has a contrasting relationship with the protagonist, portrays emotional depth, is clearly associable with an underlying theme, and has a certain originality to them. So let's get right in there and compare these monsters. The Nowhere King's biography is fully presented on screen over the course of Centaur World, what makes it quite easy to figure out his motivations. His love for the woman, the desire to become human, and the trauma of abusing himself mentally as well as physically. Without condoning the Nowhere King's actions that resulted from this, having seen what the Elctor and later the Elk have gone through, we can for sure understand why from their perspective his actions may have seemed like the correct path to take. While his very first big mistake of attempting to become human seems ridiculous from an outside perspective on the first glance, one should not forget that people not being satisfied with who they are and wanting to be someone else is actually quite the common problem. And if you knew there's a chance you can just magic away your problem, that would be quite enticing, wouldn't it? Not to mention that you really do make terrible choices sometimes when you're in love. After he split himself up, the general got all the Elctor ever dreamed of, while the Elk lived a life even worse than before. Everything was taken from him, no dreams left, lonely and unwanted. In his eyes, from the beginning to the end of his life, he's always been treated unfairly, and of course, he did experience an unbearable amount of terrible treatment. He had no reason left to not reflect this treatment back into the world. At the same time, neither the original Elctor nor the initial Elk were inherently evil. They were flawed, yes, very, but by origin, hurting anyone was not their intention. They just wanted to be happy. This inner conflict is well portrayed in the show, especially by the Elctor being physically split, the Nowhere King being mentally split again, and then the Elctor peacefully accepting his defeat when his parts join back together. On grounds of this, the Elctor/Nowhere King is actually relatable. The pursuit of love and happiness is the driving force for almost every human. Of course, the way he handled it was completely out of pocket, but he is not wrong for desiring those things. In the Core's case, deciphering the motivation is a little more difficult, mostly because the Core is not a single being, and we have little to no specific knowledge of their past. Back when the Core was first created, according to Andreas and the Core themselves, invading other worlds was simply a means of securing amphibians could keep up their living standard and continue to thrive. We don't know, but maybe the very first few Core members actually did act in Amphibia's best interest and did not destroy the worlds they went to. Regardless, in the present time, the Core have come to view themselves as a superior being. Who else should have the right to rule over Amphibia and every other world, if not them? The combined genius of history's greatest minds. Again, from the outside, saying the Core is unfoundedly evil is easy, but history has shown time over time that power changes people. Even if the original purpose of the Core wasn't ill-natured, its entire concept is based on a belief of superiority. Just knowing that, it's plain to see how over the course of thousands of years, this made the Core spiral all the way to believing they are a god. And naturally, the bigger the ego and the vaster the power, the greater the fear of being proven wrong and losing it all. We may not want to admit that we can relate, because it's objectively an undesirable development, but we did all enjoy playing king or queen as kids, being able to order everyone around. Did you want that power to end back then? It's the same thing with the Core, just on another level. Thus, the temptation of their power was also all the greater. This is where the core's complexity comes from. For the entirety of the show, they didn't waste a single thought on what happens if they lose. Yet, when that exact scenario unfolds, they go mad, willing to forfeit their life just to prove they are superior. Goes without saying, the person who drives the villain to their limits is the hero. Hero and villain are like two sides of the same coin, like yin and yang, or like Disney and other studios that treat their show creators well. A well-written villain always poses some kind of contrast to the protagonist, be that in terms of goals, values, or methods. The Nowhere King is the perfect contrast to how Horse interacts with her environment. While Horse relies on friendship, empathy, and caring leadership, the Nowhere King acts controllingly, egoistically, and is in a constant state of self-justification. In fact, their stories are extremely similar, but the ways they deal with the challenges couldn't be more different. Horse is willing to grow and learn how to accept herself as the person she truly is. On the contrary, the Nowhere King is stuck in a mindset of hate for himself and for others, but funnily enough, prefers attempting to change the way the world works instead of rising above himself. So, when Horse appears to obstruct his mission, he does everything in his power to stop her. And in that, the Nowhere King is also a perfect match for her. With his army of minotaurs, high military intelligence, and virtual immortality, he is a formidable opponent worthy of the villain title. Things look similar between Anne and the core. Anne is an advocate of the motto live and let live, and of harmony and acceptance. Moreover, according to Anne's philosophy, power stems from the bonds one shares with others. Not just power though, a huge portion of what makes you good is given to you through interaction with other people. In contrast, the core mean to take control over the lives of others, not respecting their right to a self-determined life. This is based on the core's conviction that power and greatness are things people own, that give you the authority to take whatever you want from others. And doing exactly that, they are a force to be reckoned with. Made up of the most intelligent people to ever walk Amphibia, blessed with eternal life, controlling hordes of technologically advanced robots, and a goddamn planet, it's hard to imagine there could have been anyone else to play the role of the N-Boss in the Amphibia universe. However, in the end, the heroes obviously triumph over the villain. Up to that point, the villain usually undergoes development, making the viewer feel all kinds of emotions over the course of it. As mentioned before, the Nowhere King, or rather all parts and forms of the Alctor, do develop a lot over time, though it needs to be mentioned that this transformation only becomes visible to the audience during the final 2 episodes. What is interesting about the Nowhere King's development is that it's basically a constant downward spiral except for his final moments, when he takes the minimum amount of responsibility for his actions, which is the only desirable development he ever went through. But since the Nowhere King and the Alctor are deeply tragical characters, this kind of development is just right. Little by little, with every tragic event, a new hidden layer is added to the character, showcasing step by step how the Alctor changed from a depressed guy into a villain. Thereby, the character has a profound emotional impact on the viewer. When we first meet the Nowhere King in the show, all we can feel towards him is disgust, fear, and scorn. However, as his story is presented, these emotions shift toward a feeling of tragic loss, pity, and even a hint of empathy. And while the core also evokes strong emotions in Amphibia watchers, they kind of lack development. What is great about the core is that they really came out of nowhere. Everyone knew that at some point there's something big coming in Amphibia, but no one knew when or what was coming. Then, totally unexpected, the core appeared as this creepy, mysterious, unidentifiable evil. And even better, we didn't hear anything about them for quite some time until they again came back without a warning in all their cruelty to take over Marcy. Unlike the Nowhere King, the core actually did some pretty gruesome stuff to the main characters, thereby maximizing the viewer's emotional repulsion to them. And they continue to evoke these emotions by staying inside of Marcy, a character we know and love, and by interacting with the other characters through her body. But after the core gains the body and thus the ability to talk, their initial charm is lost, which is of course sometimes inevitable in a story, but usually such movements are offset by other developments developments. Unfortunately, the core stay the way they've been with no development at all. Even in their final moments, despite being a great and impactful scene, their behavior is 100% in line with their previous personality. We neither see nor learn anything about the core that could make us think anything of them, apart from unease and hate. Though to be fair, this is probably because the whole development stuff is Andrea's thing. Now, closely connected to the last point, the emotions the audience carries towards the villain already tell a lot about the villain's underlying theme, in combination with their biography, of course. The Nowhere King's broader essence is trauma. For one, because Alctor was traumatized by this deep feeling of being ostracized, but also because the Elk was traumatized and further went on to traumatize so many others, perhaps even some of the viewers. In this sense, the Nowhere King serves as an example of what trauma can do to a person. At first he was a victim, but eventually it turned him into the villain. For the core, this is a no-brainer. Their theme is unchecked power and authority. I guess this is self-explanatory, and even if I tried to go deeper on this, I probably couldn't, because the core always having been in control is practically all we know about their past. Sadly, quite the run-of-the-mill theme without anything else to back it up. I mean, it's good that the theme is easy to identify, but a little too forgettable for my tastes. However, for a villain to be remembered, more so than their theme, their presence and originality are everything. Becoming memorable to the audience is all about the impressions a villain makes, even independently from the story. The Nowhere King is a prime example of this. First of all, his design is iconic, especially in combination with the setting he was first introduced in. His pitch black body in front of this white nothingness. Perfect. The naked skull, the gooey and rotten body, everything about him screams embodiment of evil. To top things off, his deep voice. The Nowhere King's entire presence perfectly matches his character and fulfills every expectation one may have had after first hearing the eerie Nowhere King lullaby. Not to mention that the design choices and such also contrast the calm and gentle feel of the Alctor. And while he is somewhat comparable to the Lich, I think the Lich's design is a lot more intricate. The Nowhere King's simplicity, that is what defines his originality. In addition to his physical attributes, the things he says leave a lasting impression, particularly so when he interacts with the general and the woman. These characters bring out the opposite sides of him. And then there's Horse, the only one who could possibly relate to him. Depending on who the Nowhere King talks to, the audience gets a real good look into the different layers of his character. In terms of design, the core is similarly iconic. Although they did change appearances a few times during the show, the orange glow of their eyes, next to the sheer number of them, allow the core to be identified immediately. Just the core alone do not look very original, but due to the fact that they are an amphibia, their design is a good choice. The metallic, pointy look and their color palette almost look out of place in front of the green, round, froggy amphibia, which is perfect to give them a special presence compared to the other characters. What is sort of problematic, however, is that the core relies on Marcy. On one hand, as described earlier, this adds to the core's emotional impact on the audience. But on the other hand, Marcy has her own image in the viewer's eyes, and that inevitably influences how we perceive the core while they are in her body. At times, seeing how the core abuses Marcy's body makes the viewer all the more aware of their presence. In other instances, the core appear a little too kind and goofy in Marcy's body. Not to mention that we are effectively looking at Marcy, not the core, who does not even have a known physical vessel. What actually makes it harder to associate what goes down on the screen with the character. And the fact that overall, the core have little screen time and dialogue doesn't help. Given the core's nature, one just expects a few more memorable phrases from the wisest of the wisest that have survived for millennia. Though, to be fair, whenever the core did appear, their behavior and dialogues provided quite the good look at the details of their personality. So, who is the better villain after all? We do have two pretty great villains on our hands here, but one of them is still noticeably better written than the other. You probably guessed it, the Nowhere King. He fulfills all 5 out of 5 of our criteria. There is just very little to criticize about him. He's truly a well-rounded and thought-through character. And while the core does somehow meet all of the criteria too, they do show considerable weaknesses in some of them. This is due to the core never having gotten an in-depth backstory, though based on their concept that may have been rather difficult to realize. In addition, despite the core being the end boss and overall villain in Amphibia, they are not the show's main antagonist. Had we compared Andreas and the Nowhere King here, this video may have ended in a draw. For more cartoon content, subscribe to Frogtoons. And if none of us turn into villains, I'll see you next time.